Welcome to episode 7 of Getting to Know Your Community. I'm Will, part of the DeFi Association, and I'm with Simon, who's a mentor in the blockchain space. And today we're talking to Crypto Karin. So, Karin, before we get started, we're curious. How did you come up with the name Crypto Karin? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I started my little TikTok with my 12 followers and, the algorithm brought me to crypto and I was like, this is really cool. I want to learn more about this. And then I wanted to put myself out there and actually become a creator. And I just thought, okay, well, there's like Crypto Mason and Crypto Josh. So let's be Crypto Karin. And let's make my page a crypto page. So that's how it all started. And now I think, I have a really strong female audience, which I really love, and a male audience as well. And, now I've been able to get over like my camera shyness and become Crypto Karin and have, really interesting discussions and hopefully out there providing news and updates. And that's Crypto Karin.
Wonderful.
We hear you are in security, are you? What kind of security? So Web 2 to Web 3 security, as I understand?
Well, it was Web 3. I was consulting in tech for the last 7 or 8 months. I just got a new job, so I just it's a job in the Web 2 world, but I'm going to bring the brand to Web 3. I'm ready talking to them about NFTs and the metaverse, it's going to happen. But consulting in tech and privacy and security mainly, and advising startups on their privacy obligations and how to navigate the online privacy world in an unregulated space, really.
Can I dig into that about the Web 2 to Web 3? I think a lot of people have different ideas of what Web 2 and Web 3 are. So what's your perspective of the difference between Web 2 and Web 3, and especially how does it apply to security? Because that one I really don't quite understand what security-wise looks like for Web 3.
Right. Well, I think all of the builders and developers and founders are figuring that out as they go. But the main difference in my eyes between Web 2 and Web 3 is the decentralization of information and data. So that's my real interest is data and data privacy and where's information going and where's information being stored. And right now, the power and the information is with so many centralized authorities. So moving towards a Web 3 space, we're hopefully going to get more power and more ownership of our own data and our own information. But with that comes, I think, more responsibilities. You have to be really aware of security and privacy, and you don't want to, there's no one to call in Web 3. There's no help desk to be oh, I've breached my data, So I think there's a couple of pitfalls that everyone's still trying to figure out. And there's the regulators are still grappling with that. I think they're not sure what to do about that yet, because the current legislative framework doesn't really apply to the Web 3 world yet, right? So we'll see.
So Karin, I'm actually curious, so you mentioned both privacy and security, and I was wondering, so there's heaps of, so when you think about privacy and security, it's like a massive field. So I was wondering, so what are you involved in? Is it encryption of data? Is it, protecting users in Web 2? And, how do you want to translate that to Web 3?
So right now, for the company I work for now, it's data privacy of customer information, employee information, and basically making sure that that's secured and protected as it should be, really to avoid a massive business data breach or cyber attack or something like that. But when I was consulting in tech and consulting in privacy, it was really advising entities about what they should and should not be collecting, because I think that's the first port of call with privacy, right? It's if you're collecting things that you don't need or don't have a business need for, that's the first problem. So that was my main remit.
Interesting.
Okay, to dig into that, I guess, of the privacy section, you know, we're talking about privacy in databases. And my ignorant mind, when I think of blockchain is open source and transparent. So how does security and privacy and databasing come into it for you then, when blockchain is open source supposedly and transparent?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I think when we think about privacy and blockchain and privacy and crypto, there's a couple of different ways of thinking about it. There's privacy coins, which are more protected. There's, you know, Monero is a primary one where, you know, if you're trading a Bitcoin, your wallet address that can be traced back to you, and that is transparent, and that's the point of the blockchain, right? But if you're using something like Monero or a privacy mixer or something like that, there are ways to be more de-identified on the blockchain. And I think that's probably what a lot of people who want to remain anonymous on a non-anonymous technology will be using. And then there's, you know, if you're talking about centralized authorities and platforms and, you know, things like that, then your identity is tied back to that as well. So I think identity and privacy are really closely linked. There are ways to hide your identity on the blockchain, and I think using some of those techniques would be the way to do it. But the beautiful thing about the blockchain, right, is that it is open source and it is up there for everyone to see. So if you don't want that for whatever reason, you're probably going to have to add a layer or two of complexity.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Like it's open so anyone can audit it, but then at the same time, yeah, everybody knows exactly what you're doing, when you did it, and how much you spent, and you know that's something that needs to be solved. And I think there's solutions that are coming out, but they're probably still really young, like you mentioned. Mixers, which interestingly, not a lot of people know that much about mixers. I wonder if you could you know, maybe tell us a little bit about mixers, how you use them, if there's any mixers that you could recommend.
I don't know too much about mixers. I know that there's a way to use a mixer technology that I think it ties in with like zero proof knowledge, where the technology tells the party you're interacting with, yes, we have this information, we confirm that that is what we've seen, but we're just letting you know that we've seen the information and it's valid, but we're not going to share that information with you. So I think it's tied to that like zero proof knowledge, where it's that protection that the technology offers, that it's like that assurance of, hey, we got this, we confirm that we have the information, we confirm that you can make this trade, this trade that you want to make, and but not
no
actually revealing the underlying information. That's the way it's protected.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to just dig into, I guess, a bit more of why security and decentralization is important for databases. You know, we're in a world now where, you know, crypto's in a down market. Everyone's looking for the reason why to use blockchain. So what is it? What's the sales pitch? Why would someone say, yes, I need to have that? That's way better than the existing system.
Well, I think a lot of businesses are going to have to ask themselves that question over the next few years, right? There's a lot of business enterprise blockchains that are really attractive to a range of industries. I think, for example, like the health industry and the identity industry. Think about the sales pitch, I would say, to an industry looking to upgrade their technology and enter the blockchain technology or start using something like that, is this decentralization of, you can't take down the system, right? You can't take down, you can't breach the system and breach that information unless you take down all of the nodes, which is a much better protection than breaching one database, which often companies have one database and then like a backup database, and it's, you know, that's their disaster recovery. Whereas to, you know, breach a blockchain, you have to take down the whole network. That's obviously much more difficult. So I would say it, in a lot of ways, it's more secure, right? Much more the authority and the control is not with one party, which there's a lot of security promise around.
Yeah, and I do remember, I think it was in 2018, where there was a specific virus that was going around, and it actually hit the place I was working for. And it came in as a resume, and somebody opened up the resume, they clicked accept macro,
Really?
and the virus spread everywhere. A couple of minutes later, we were compromised. The data went like that.
Wow.
And that is such a big risk for any organization. So like you say, it's super important to have it first of all in different nodes. One node may be compromised, but with the encryption that's in blockchains, that's probably really hard to do. Now you spread across heaps of nodes. I wonder if I wonder if you've heard of Web 5, which is also really interesting.
I heard I saw a post, I think it was like Jack Dorsey or someone talking about Web 5, and I just thought, oh my God, Web 3 hasn't even fully evolved yet. I can't even think about, we've completely skipped Web 4 apparently. No, but tell me about Web 5.
Well, it's really interesting. I think it ties into what you were talking about, decentralizing data. And so Web 5 was, it's a play on words. So it's all about combining both Web 2 and Web 3, which is also kind of, I think, what you're trying to do. And so what Dorsey was trying to propose was getting, so pretty much storing data in decentralized nodes, right? And then the problem with companies today is that, so say your data is on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's all siloed, and Facebook and Twitter do own information, which is something else that you mentioned before. But then the whole premise of this is that the whole data itself is completely decentralized. And what happens is you have an ID, they call it a DID, a decentralized ID that is stored on the blockchain, on Bitcoin's blockchain. And what happens is apps ask you for permission to access data, and it's very granular. So you can say, yes, you're a doctor, so you can have this kind of information. You're a social network, so you can have my name, my photos, and the friends that I'm following, and so on. So it's a really interesting way of controlling data. But I don't know about calling it Web 5. It's It
just sounds like an extension of Web 3, I guess. But yeah, maybe they wanted to sound all new and techie.
I think that must have been it.
Karin, I want to ask you that what we're seeing so far in crypto is we've had a DeFi summer, and DeFi is now probably going through an evolution stage to be probably better, hopefully at the end of it. I haven't seen, I guess, from a privacy security perspective, the first level of that. We haven't really seen it integrated or in use, many use cases out there. How far away do you think it is from actually really seeing some actual real use cases and adoption of this kind of technology for you?
Yeah, I think, right now, while the market's down, I know builders and developers are making the most of it and working really hard. Over the last couple of months, I've met a couple of founders working on privacy and identity and security initiatives. So I know there's work going on in the space. What I'd really like to see is some established privacy and security and identity protocols that could be adopted over different blockchains. I think some are already doing that. I know Storj, STORJ, is doing some really cool stuff with decentralized storage. And there are a couple of other companies that kind of jump to mind that are trying to tackle this problem. But I think it's so tricky without having that legislative and regulatory framework in place, and not just in any one country, but internationally. We have such different approaches and then such fragmented privacy and security laws, and we still don't know how, if at all, they're going to apply to centralized companies, because you can't really, I don't know how we really are going to regulate something like Bitcoin. Who do we call? We can't call the CEO of Bitcoin and be like, hey, you really need to implement this privacy protocol or this and this thing. So I think we've still got a way to go. I think we're still grappling with how to collect and deal with information. And I think going forward, Oracle networks will be really important because we've got so much information out there. Our whole lives are online. Everything we interact with collects information. And I think Oracle networks will be really important in translating the information that is already out there in the world onto blockchains. So I think things like Chainlink will be really important because the information's there. We just want to take the right information, have it on the blockchain, have it stored appropriately with the appropriate protections. And then at the end of the day, we want control of that. Like imagine if, with that identity thing, that would be really incredible to be able to interact with services and providers and only hand over what you need to hand over. Like a really simple example is going to a bar and they, take your ID and they scan your ID. It's like that bar is actually just wanting to verify that you're over 18. So the only piece of information they need is your date of birth. Like there is no reason why they need your name, your photo, and your address and your date of birth. So if you think of it really simply of like the information that's out there and what's actually needed, if we can have some protocols and oracles in place that will extract the right information and we can actually start to use data in a way that helps us and not just have it out there floating for eternity with companies that might not be putting in the appropriate controls in place. So I think we've still got a way to go, but I know that there are people that, are very aware that this is a problem and that this is going to be, like scalability and interoperability, one of the big issues that we have to solve if we want successful blockchains and protocols.
That's really interesting. I think it could even get more granular because you talked about zero knowledge proofs before. And so, the bar might not even need to know your date of birth. All it needs to know is that you're over 18.
True, exactly. Exactly, like a yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pick apart that? Because I think a lot of people are like, just understanding Bitcoin, for people are sitting there, well, why do we need a different kind of money? I already have dollars. So can you explain to us, I guess, so people can understand, okay, the bar only needs to know your date of birth. They don't need your picture. They don't need your address and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people say, but who cares? What's the risk? Why do we want to protect that information? Why is it important for people to know that needs to be protected?
Well, sticking with the bar example, like they take that photo and they store that, and like how long are they storing that for? Who has access to that? Do you want someone who's working at the bar to have your photo and your address? Like very simply sticking with that example, it's the information we hand over. And if you think about how much we hand over with websites and trackers and things like that, I think if people don't care / aren't interested in the protection of their personal information, I think they probably don't understand the level of risk to it. And maybe have not been like on the dark web where you can buy someone's identity for $5, their credit card information, their address, their name, their social security number. That stuff has come from breaches. It's come from inappropriate protections, and it's come from us handing over things that if we sat back and thought about it, we didn't need to hand over, or we shouldn't have handed over to that party in that way. So I think with businesses as well, like they only, in my experience in auditing companies and government agencies and looking at what they're doing with data, nobody cares about privacy and security until they've had a data breach. And then they're like, oh, actually, this goes to the fundamentals of our business. And now we have to pay this. We have to report these people. We have to self-report. We have to deal with this damage to our reputation. And if you look at it from an individual perspective, like going through restoring your identity is such a nightmare and is so complicated. And there are a few services that help people with that, like there's like ID Care, and I think the government has some services about it. But once it's out there and once it's been breached, like it's really can mess up your credit. You can it can be difficult to buy a house, open up new bank accounts. So I think if people aren't like aware of the issues, they might be like, oh, well, my info's out there anyways, who cares? But it's when it really has a real life impact on you that you realize the importance of it.
I imagine hackers could probably use that information. So the information that's out there is, you could call it harmless, but then I think someone with the right skills could probably find all that information that's scattered, put it together, and then maybe use that to get into your bank account or something.
Right.
And all they need to say is, my name is such and such. I've lost my password. What was your cat's name? And there you go.
Yeah.
Boom.
And that stuff's probably on my Instagram or something like this. It can be fragmented, but you can piece together that information, right? And then just do a search on the dark web. It's probably out there somewhere already if you have that website. I'd say for individuals that Have I Been Pwned website, if you've ever been on there, type in your email address and see if there's been a breach. There's countless companies that you've probably interacted with that have had some kind of cyberware attack, and that information's out there somewhere.
So,
sorry.
Simon.
Sure. I wanted to bring it to an example, I guess, again, because I love using examples, but example very much in the minds of a lot of DeFi people who've been around for a little bit was the Ledger database hack, where they got the phone numbers and addresses and emails of all the people who bought ledgers. And I personally didn't get affected by it, but many of my friends, still to this day, getting texts and emails about this. So obviously that was a huge breach of privacy. A lot of people in crypto got scammed by this. What is the proposals that you're saying? How would that protect and prevent something like that occurring?
Well, so was that a ransomware attack or a cyberware attack? I'm not sure.
I don't know specifically what the attack was, but they got into Ledger. They got their database of all the people who bought ledgers and their addresses and their phone numbers and emails.
Yeah, that's terrible. So yeah, that's interesting as well, because you're trying to interact with like a crypto resource and you're like, come on, they should at least be technologically aware of these risks. But I'd be interested to see from an audit perspective, like what databases they were using, what access controls they had in place, whether there was like the appropriate VPNs and separation. It sounds like stuff like that, where it's different subsets of information being breached at the same time. That sounds like it was all stored together and not in separate systems or separate databases. So that probably to me points to like an immature cybersecurity infrastructure. So if centralized entities that are looking to break into this space, like all eyes are on you guys. Like with the Celsius event the other week, where Celsius announced that they were pausing withdrawals, like these are companies that are pioneering new technologies and new ways of interacting. Like we're watching that you do it right. We're watching that you protect the information you collect. We're watching that you have your customers' backs, and Ledger and Celsius and companies like that are maybe not hitting that mark. So I think I'd be wary of startups that want to jump into Web3 or Web5 or whatever it is and have actually like really immature cybersecurity frameworks and haven't invested the right money in making sure that the data is stored properly and is protected. But that's a shame, because we're so excited about these new technologies and things, and then it's like, oh, we're just back to companies disappointing us and treating our data like it's nothing. That's really disappointing.
So Karin, it's good that you say that. So you're talking about it from the side of the companies. Obviously, the companies have responsibilities in protecting our data, but then what can we do on our side, especially those of us who own ledgers, where, like how can we protect our data? What steps should we do to stay private and secure?
Yeah, so going from like top to bottom, there's so many things you can do. So I have controls and protections around everything in terms of like turn your trackers off, use DuckDuckGo, not Google, things like that, people aren't aware that these websites, when you're using them and when you're browsing, the data is actually being captured and is being sold and transferred to other companies. So maybe starting with self-education and being like, okay, let me just actually read this privacy policy that is being popped up on the screen and not just going like yes to all, you know. It's like
Guilty.
if we want and I get it, because they say there's some stat that's like if you read all the privacy policies that we were faced with, you'd be reading for like 12 years or something crazy, and you know, nobody wants to do that. But if we're moving to a world where we control where our data is stored, and we control, you know, what blockchain it's on and what blockchains and what systems we interact with, like we need to take that ownership. And so I would say, you know, the basic personal controls, like being aware what browsers you're using, being aware, I guess, what information you're handing out. So if someone asks you for this and this and this, it's like, I want to know that there's a good reason for you collecting this, and I want to know where it's going. And that might mean like reading the privacy policy and being like, oh, okay, so you're selling this overseas, you're selling this to like Experian or some, you know, credit service provider that's going to monetize that information. So just being aware of those risks, and actually taking a bit of time to be like, okay, there's a few steps I can do, and, you know, not just handing the full control over to the party you're interacting with. So a bit of self-ownership and self-education there, and also knowing what to do in the event of an incident. So, you know, if someone had picked up with that resume example, like, you know, if there was anything fishy about that, like, so self-training about phishing and viruses and malware. And I have like really good malware and virus protection on my computer and my phone, and I've got my privacy screens on my cameras. Like, I'm very like, there's information and being collected at all times. Like, I won't hand over what I don't need to hand over. So yeah, being self-aware would be my advice.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, Karin, thank you very much for your time today. It's been awesome to get all things about security and Web3. So I've loved the conversation. So thanks very much for your time.
Me too. Thanks so much, guys. It was great chatting to you. I'm always down to chat crypto, privacy, security, any of the above.